Alright, so this is just summary in 5 minutes to give a quick introduction to the fun topic that actually Anupam invited me here for. I've had the good fortune to be a serial entrepreneur that has actually bootstrapped my way entirely to success. So I wanted to give you guys a quick introduction, and then I've prepared 4 slides on what I think were, in many ways, how bootstrapping enabled me to avoid certain mistakes that many funded companies make. And so I'm going to cover those mistakes, and then we'll jump into what will be a more exciting part of the discussion with Anupam. For folks who sort of may not necessarily have a background, I've been a serial entrepreneur now for about 20 years. I started my first company in 98, early 98. In the hosting and domain name registration space, there were 3 sort of businesses within that company. So it was called DirectEye with Reseller Club, Logic Boxes, and Big Rock. And I ran these, I co-founded these along with my younger brother, and we ran these from 98 to about 2014. Well, a little bit before that, we actually brought in senior management, etc. And then sold these companies in a $160 million transaction in 2014 to a public company based in Boston called Endurance. Somewhere between that time frame also, we started a company called Skenzo, which eventually morphed into Media.net. My brother kind of ran that company between 2010 and 2016, and then we actually sold that one in a $900 million transaction to a public company based in China. And currently I'm the founder of Flock and Radix, and I co-founded Zeta with a gentleman called Ramki. So I currently own and operate these 3 companies right now. No current sort of intention to sell any of them, etc. I'm really excited with the prospects of what we're doing with each of them. And so each of these companies, Flock, Zeta, Radix, Media.net, and DirectEye, every one of them is being bootstrapped. So I started actually back in 98 with roughly $300 borrowed from my father, and the 2 of us bought our first server in a company called Alabanza in the US, and started selling hosting space, and then started selling domain names, and grew that business organically, and then from the profits of that business invested in the second one, and then the profits from those 2 businesses invested in the third one, and sort of kept organically growing to what now is close to maybe somewhere between $1.5 $1.6 billion in net value across the entire set of organizations. And one of the things that I talk about when it comes to sort of startups and well, many of these companies are no longer startups, etc. But I've always fundamentally believed that when you talk about a business, that the dictionary definition of a business is the purchase and sale of goods and services in an attempt to make profit. And sometimes I feel that a lot of startups, a lot of tech companies in our space tend to forget this notion, that we intended to run a profit-seeking enterprise of concern. In many ways, because I was bootstrapped, I always had to sort of pursue monetization and pursue sort of profitability as soon as possible. Each subsequent sort of business or venture has enabled me to have a longer gestation period because the capital base sort of accumulated. But so I was going to talk about, as I said, 4 mistakes that I think bootstrapping has enabled me to avoid, which I think can potentially kill a company or end up in sort of issues in the startup world, right? So the first one I want to talk about is this whole notion of, and I keep talking about this again in various forums, the notion of focusing on valuation versus value creation. And it's unfortunate that the media and the entire startup community primarily glamorizes unicorn status and billion-dollar valuations and races of $100 million and so on and so forth. And very rarely do you actually come across articles and publicity around true value creation. What's the value that we're creating as a startup ecosystem? What is the value that we're creating for customers, for employees, employment, etc. And really, when you're actually a bootstrap company, you're never chasing. I was never chasing. Okay, I have to raise the next round of money because my current funds are going to run out. I'm going to have to, raise money at $100 million valuation. There was never that constant race of, okay, how do I get the next round? How do I get the next round? Which allowed me to focus on truly value creation as opposed to valuation. They're 2 very different semantics. When you think about things like valuation, we end up using a lot of proxy metrics like GMV and users and eyeballs and impressions and stuff like that. When you talk about value creation, you actually truly use real metrics like net promoter score, customer satisfaction, profit, revenue, etc. And one of the fundamental things that I believe in is the metrics that you focus on are the ones you will end up improving. So if you focus on metrics that lead to valuation, sure, you might achieve valuation, but you may not end up with true value creation. Versus if you actually focus on value creation, valuation to me is always a side effect and not the goal or the number that needs to be chased. So that's kind of the first mistake that helped us avoid. This is the second one, and again I see a lot of startups and tech companies sort of falling into this, this issue of substituting creativity with cash. When as a company you have lesser capital, I mean I always believe that adversity results in innovation, right? So when as a company you have lesser amount of capital, you have no choice but to be creative. You have to be creative. You can't afford that blitz television advertising campaign, so you have to focus on guerrilla marketing tactics. You can't afford to essentially spend money on useless, or make mistakes, etc. on useless areas, and so you have to actually innovate and deliver true value. On the other hand, if you have tons of money and you're flush with cash, there's always this temptation to substitute creativity with cash and throw money at the problem. And the thing about that is that substituting creativity with cash sometimes can work, but only works as long as your money lasts. If you build the muscle groups in your company to truly come up with creative solutions to problems, that's going to last forever because you've created that process where people are going to be innovative in general. But cash is not going to last forever. And so, again, across the Net Media.net, Radix, Block, and Zeta, we've always ended up trying to make make every buck count, sort of take it, stretch it to as much as we can, and that requires considerable amount of creativity. Having done that over 20 years, now we build the muscle groups in the organization to kind of enable that. The third mistake again is again very easy to sort of fall into this trap as a highly funded startup is let's grow from 1,000 people to 10,000 people. Hiring in quantity as opposed to quality, and this is again something that I fundamentally believe in, is that firstly, hiring in quantity is not only necessarily bad in terms of sort of extra management overhead, having to handle sort of tons of processes, etc., and having to sort of a lot of time I find a lot of companies end up in this cycle of, oh, we've got cash, let's expand. Then they expand, and it's a good segue to the next point. They expand, they hire a ton of people, and they're like, now we have these people, so let's find something else to do. And this constant sort of, vicious cycle of sort of defocusing, etc., which is the next point I want to make. But the point that I want to also sort of delve on out here is that quantity will never substitute for quality. If you look at what Beethoven managed to do, for instance, in the field of music, I can't take 100 avid musicians and say, let me now use these guys and replicate what Beethoven did, right? There's one Usain Bolt in the world whose sort of fastest clock speed is 45 kilometers an hour. I can't take 100 average athletes or runners and say, okay, I'm going to replicate exactly what he did. Right? So it's not just about the fact that, whether you can do more or achieve stuff faster with more people, which I think in many ways is sort of an anomaly that's not true. But there are some things that you just can't do with quantity. You need the right quality, right? And again, with lower capital, you're forced to hire rock stars. You can't afford to hire 100 people, so you want to hire the 10 best so that they can actually produce and deliver as much as possible. And the last one that I'll focus on, and I'll kind of turn it to Anupam to start this sort of fun session, is again with capital. When you have $200 million sitting in the bank, accumulating, mutual fund, liquid sort of level interest, there's always this temptation of, okay, why don't you start more? Why don't you do some other things, etc. Right? So, a cab company might become a fintech player might become an e-commerce provider, an e-commerce provider might become a travel company. You keep diversifying because, hey, there's cash in the bank. And I think this is the biggest, out of all the other points, all the other mistakes, keeping funding aside, one of the biggest things that kills startups is defocus. Success is always going to be directly proportional to focus and inversely proportional to the number of balls that you're juggling. And in the starting stages of your kind of organization or company, etc., in the early years, it's important to really focus and narrow down on that one problem that you're trying to solve as opposed to constantly sort of jump from one problem to another. So that's sort of quickly it. Just 4 quick mistakes that in many ways bootstrapping help us sort of avoid to result in kind of success. And with that, I'll close my presentation.
Thank you for that, Bhavin. That's quite contrarian. Usually all you read about these days is which company is becoming the next sort of raising the next large VC check. So thanks for that wisdom. And I'm super excited to have you here. In some ways, we kind of started a journey of careers together. I think we won our first award together, if I'm not mistaken, back.
And you were one of our early clients.
Yes, that's right. We worked together as well. So it's amazing to have been sort of this silent spectator or witness to your incredible journey, right? So let me start with first things first. You are now sort of a billionaire. You've got 3 companies you've sold, or 2 and 3 you're running. homes in California, London. You know, you've got access to everything. You're not even 40, and you're single. So when are you joining Shaadi.com?
I'm going to actually tell you a very interesting anecdote, by the way, that you'll find quite amusing. This is obviously back in the day when you guys were actually working with us with Direct past hosting company. On a week before one of the April Fool's Day, my younger brother, Dave, actually changed the settings of our internal office network such that anybody from our office who went to Shaadi.com on the homepage saw my profile as a featured profile for a bachelor who's looking out for a partner.
I was wondering why our site crashed.
And then people, no, this is only from our company. And so people sent me the link and I'm like, what the hell? Right? I kind of thought my dad or mom had something to do with it. And so I went to my brother's cabin, actually, obviously, sort of he disclosed it, sort of, because I assumed that somebody called you guys up and said, hey, listen, put my profile up there.
So is he still trying to get you married?
No. He wasn't trying to get me married. This was an internal.
Are your parents trying to get you married?
They've given up.
They've given up.
Yeah. There was a 5 to 7 year period when every dinner conversation there was a subtle / non-subtle, depending on the occasion or day, indication of like, hey, what's happening?
I'll tell you how the curve usually goes very quickly. First, they start saying that you marry within the same community, then they say same religion. At some point, my nana started telling me, make sure it's.
I mean, right now, I think my parents be happy with an inanimate object, honestly. Yeah,
yes, there you go.
They've given up. Anything is fine.
No, but on a more serious note, you've obviously had this remarkable journey, right? You've built an incredible company, but I think what's most important about that journey is that you've done it in a bootstrap fashion. I tried to do some research and I looked around and, I couldn't find too many companies that have built billion-dollar valuations and have remained bootstrapped and gone on to exit. Right? Eventually, everybody succumbs. But you've sort of done that. But one thing along with that is that through this journey, if I could say so, you and your brother have kind of been sort of the silent unicorns or the invisible unicorns, almost under-celebrated. In my own book, you're right there, top of the list, right? Why is that? Is that sort of a deliberate strategy, or?
No, I think it's an accident. I mean, I get briefed from my PR team now all the time about this. So in some ways, I guess it didn't matter much to us in terms of engaging a lot in publicity back in the day, because a lot of our business was B2B. Today, Flock and Zeta do have some pretty consumerish flavor, so I have been strictly instructed by my marketing team to start kind of being less media shy in that sense. But yeah, it wasn't required for the goal that we were trying to achieve, and so never really went ahead and tried in any way to promote some of these things. I think the other aspect also has been that all of our companies, so one way that we're different from many of the companies we talk about in India are obviously bootstrap versus funded. But the other interesting way that we're actually different is that every one of our companies has had a global focus. In fact, not one of them is an India-only focus, even though it might start out as an India-only focus in some cases. And so it's never been, okay, this has worked in the US or this has worked in Germany or Japan or whatever, let's bring that same thing to India and replicate it. It's always been about how do we innovate to create new products and services that we can sell all across the world. So that's the other reason why, in some sense, the media and stuff wasn't necessarily as relevant, because we weren't necessarily impacting consumers in India to that. So I think those are the two reasons why that must have been an occurrence.
Hopefully we can, starting with this session, we can change all that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's my marketing team would be very thankful to you.
I'll send them a check. But, just for an entrepreneur, there's a lot of entrepreneurs here. I've been watching for the last 2 days. I think what would be really good for everyone to understand is, I think you were 18 when you started out? 17. What led to starting this company, and what were you thinking at that point, right? A lot of us do it because we have nothing to lose. Was it the same for you, or was it a different type of plan that you had?
I mean, I definitely had nothing to lose back in the day, because, when I started out, so I mean, I was fortunate enough to find my passion early on. I started coding at the age of 10. So this is 1989, I was in my 6th grade in a school called TiECon Mumbai, and they installed their very first computer room. And I was hooked. I mean, I would spend my short breaks, lunch breaks, several hours after school. The computer teacher would sort of just leave the keys in the computer room with me, and I would just spend several hours coding every day. It also kind of helped them with boys-only school, so no distractions. But basically, but basically,
I seem to have kept to that still.
But basically, my dad, who sort of instilled tons of values and principles and really great habits in us in the early days, taught me like 30 to 40 different books, and I would just keep experimenting. I used to actually organize these classes for the teacher and the students after school, teaching them sort of advanced programming tactics and techniques, etc. And during that phase, I also read a lot of biographies. I read every biography I could lay my hands on, like 4 biographies of Apple, 7 of Microsoft, Intel, Oracle, Xerox, like pretty much every IT and several non-IT companies like Chrysler Corp, McDonald's, etc. And so just I was generally inspired to, one, it was very clear to me that I would do something in computer science, and generally I was like, there was the thought of pursuing a job or that path was never even an option in my head. It was always that I want to start my own company and do my own thing. So I guess in some sense I found that passion early on. I've also fundamentally always believed, like I said this yesterday, that I think every one of us, we have an amazing gift, this life that we lead, and I think it's really our obligation, duty to kind of make an impact as proportionate to our potential. I think that for me, I still have a long way to go in terms of what I believe I can create an impact the rest of my life. So that kind of keeps driving me.
See, you really make me feel inadequate. Because I still go around very confused about what I want out of life. And you talk about how you had clarity when you were 17 about what you wanted to do. So I was going to talk a little bit about VCs, and we'll get to that, I promise. But this is a very interesting point. I think clarity, right, is worth more than any education you can get, in my view. And so how does a 17, 18-year-old, get that kind of clarity? If you had to attribute your success to, let's say, clarity, what are those enabling things that happened early on in your life that led to it? And don't say hard work and perseverance and all that crap.
So I'll talk about clarity. I'm a huge fan, for instance, of Simon Sinek's material. Many of you guys have read it or seen his videos, etc. And he sort of talks about this. I guess in some sense now there's a label for it. Back when I was 17, it was kind of ephemeral. He talks about the whole notion of start with the why. Like, what's the purpose? Why are you doing what you're doing? And as I said back then, like early on, I guess there were a couple of things. One is I had this whole fundamental notion that 60 years from now or 100 years from now, whatever, depending on how long we live, if I look back at my life, I want to be able to say that I really used every single minute in the most efficient way possible to be able to create an impact and make a difference in the world. And so that's something that's something slowly early on. The other interesting thing is
you just lucked out in the DNA pool, it seems like.
Well, that, I guess, nature and nurture, which is kind of what the second point that I was going to reference. My father's been really instrumental in many ways in some of the success, of all of the success we've achieved, in terms of principles, values, habits, investing in us, etc. It's one thing I used to keep saying, like, I won't even kid you, like almost every alternate day, he would keep telling us that, you can achieve anything you set your mind to. And as kids, you sometimes find it frustrating to hear it over and over and over again. But really, today or now or in the last, history of my entrepreneurial career, I've realized that it's such a powerful statement. You just keep repeating it, and it just becomes like a fundamental truth that I strongly believe in. Today I'm running, this is my 5th company. All 5 are in completely diverse industries. I had no clue about payments before I started Zeta. No clue about communication before I started Block, etc. Each of these are new spaces, no clue about advertising before we started Skenzo. And just that level of confidence that it doesn't matter because you start from first principles and you have this confidence you can really achieve anything you set your mind to, and I think that's a lot of credit goes to him in terms of
it's great clarity, big aspirations, and first principles, right? You bring those together and you can solve a lot of problems. Well, that's remarkable. We should talk a little bit about VCs. That's probably a good segue into this controversial topic, why VCs. And it's been 20 years since you started out. I'm sure there was a lot of pressure to raise capital. I remember over 10 years back, you almost raised around, I introduced you to a couple of guys, I don't know if you remember that, and we had some conversations. But what happened? Somehow or the other, just before you said I do, you kind of walked away from the aisle. What was that?
Yes, the runaway bride, yeah. I think firstly there have been several opportunities along the way, both inbound, as well as kind of times and places where I thought, hey, let's go ahead and take a look at it. And I'm not going to say never. I mean, there's some stuff we're doing with Block and Zeta that is going to scale to a point where at some point it might not make sense for me to continue funding them, just because of the kind of scale of proportion that we're looking at. So yes, I mean, I certainly don't say don't raise funds, but I think each and every one of those, in each and every one of those scenarios, I guess the goal was to try and figure out if it would actually make a meaningful difference. And so, Direct I started making money from pretty much the first year. And obviously I was learning a lot while I was learning in those initial stages. So, to achieve the kind of scale of operations that I needed back then, there was no funding required. Then by the time we got to kind of the next idea, we already had a substantial amount of both cumulative profits. I mean, we lead pretty humble lives back then, certainly, and even now, like significant amount of spend all the money.
Except the plane. Was that your brother?
Yes.
That's your brother.
He's definitely a flying enthusiast, so loves that as a hobby. But
the homes in every country in the world.
Well, that's actually more
that's
actually more of an efficiency play for me. To be honest, I hate hotels because, and this is another frustration of mine, they never get work environments right. They never have the right lighting, the right ergonomic desk, the right chair. So I literally look at every one of my homes, it's fitted with there's a process document fitted with the exact same 3 monitors, desk, a chair that's actually shipped from here to every one of my locations because that's the chair I want to sit on. Because I sit on that, I work 14 hours a day, I want that environment to be absolutely perfect.
So first principles, next company is going to be a hotel.
I've thought about it, but the profit margins and scalability is just not anywhere close to the level of, so yeah, it would be more of a lifestyle play than anything.
It's tough to bootstrap.
Well, I can still bootstrap it now, but yes, it originally would have been. Yeah, so I was saying that there have been opportunities per se, but there wasn't any need at each of those inflection points. And there was a point at the time we introduced that was for Radix, by the way. So I put in, originally I put in 50 million, we kind of got back 25 in the first year.
Was that for MediaNet? I don't remember.
No, MediaNet we never raised. We did a secondary, but we bought back that stake, so we kind of then again owned the entire stake. For Radix, actually, we did seek external investment, but it was just taking so much time, I just put in the 50 million entirely myself. And I mean, it just made no sense to kind of wait and spend so much time in sort of selling the concept to a bunch of people. And because I had the cash.
So for most of us really humble people who cannot just put in 50 million.
Well, that was my first company. So I mean, think about it. The first company, the investment was $300. The second company, the investment was less than $1 million from the previous profit, etc. Obviously, each subsequent company, it's been easier for me to write a bigger check.
Not taking away from the fact that you built it on your own, but the point is that for most people, how do you reconcile, right? When everybody here reads the news, I read the news. There's like, 15, 16 unicorns now in India, maybe close to 300 globally. Every month, every week, you hear of a new one. And there's not a single one, guys, at least I couldn't find one, that is not VC. So for people who are reading that news, which almost tells them that you cannot really become successful without a VC or build a unicorn, and you don't have $50 million to plop down, what would you say? How do you reconcile that? When do you take VC money? When do you not? How do you walk away from VC chasing you to give you money?
Well, I mean, I think equity is the costliest capital. So if you have conviction in yourself and you're able to, then there's really no reason to take equity, right? So, and dilute, right? To me, even now, I mean, to a certain extent, I must honestly admit that I haven't made any significant contribution in terms of being an investor myself. I'm just so busy running my 3 companies. But when I think about it, a lot of the capital, a lot of the past capital that I've created, I invest in myself, and I have the highest conviction in myself and my team. So I mean, to me, it's the lowest risk investment that I can possibly make. I control the variables. I have past credibility, and I have an amazing team that kind of works with me to deliver. And so, in some sense,
there's no relationship risk with yourself.
I'm sorry.
There's no relationship risk with yourself.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise my hurdle rate is what, like 2-3% in like safe instruments. So if you think about it, like anything, like if I was to go out there, and no VC is going to be able to match that hurdle rate in that sense. So to me now, I think raising funds for me would be more of a strategic plus capital mix as opposed to purely a capital scenario. But again, I'm not advocating. I think the one takeaway, since you mentioned it, is all I will say is that I don't think that anybody should sit here and say that something can or can't be done. I don't think there's one particular prescribed way of getting to success. Whether it's culture, whether it's capital, there is no sort of prescribed approach that this is the only way to work. I think that's the one takeaway I would say. from this story. There are examples, I mean, of companies like Classic, another company that I respect a lot, that was bootstrapped to quite an extent, and they subsequently then sort of raised funds, etc. So there are companies that reached a certain level definitely before raising funds. Browser Stack and actually India itself, I think they're a great example of somebody who was bootstrapped for a while.
Zoho as well.
Exactly. So they're definitely examples of companies. So I certainly would say that people shouldn't go back, shouldn't ever think that, oh, the only way I'm going to succeed is if I raise funding. You just might have to be.
I guess it also depends on the industry, right? I mean, you can hardly get into e-commerce or food delivery without having a bunch of large, sort of pocketed VCs backing you. Would you say there's anything to that?
I mean, I would say that there's always an idea and a way, but certainly there are industries that lend themselves far more to bootstrapping than certain that don't because of the path to profitability. So how far you can go, I mean, to me, I think the biggest reasons to raise would be when somebody scales in an industry and there is no immediate path to profitability, but there's a clear business model that will get you there. So yes, I can understand in those scenarios that you would need to raise funds. So it definitely depends on industry, that I'll agree with.
But see, this is no fun. We're kind of finding peace here, and you're saying sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. Let's make it a little more controversial. VCs. In some form or way, there's one school of thought which says they're kind of like the mafia, where they have to get a piece of the action. So they're the new age mafia. And then there's a school of thought which says, look, besides capital, VCs bring a lot of value to a company and help. With outcomes, growth, so on and so forth. Where do you sit on that debate? Do you think it's just the toll booth that we are paying these guys, or do you think there's a lot of value that VCs
can? I definitely think there's a lot of value, no doubt about it. There are certain really unhealthy practices that I am actually quite deeply concerned about. The two that really come to mind for me is one, I think that, and I've seen that in my own scenario, which is that because I have a low hurdle rate in my own capital, I can afford to never give up. So I can take an idea, and as it happens with many scenarios, many ideas, entrepreneurs learn along the way. One of the biggest things that I think is an instrument in success is conviction and never giving up. But with VCs, it's about, oh yeah, okay, we'll invest in 10 companies and 2 might succeed, and the remaining 8 will never, even though the entrepreneurs have learned significant amount of lessons along the way, etc. And I see a bit more of a celebrating failure culture probably in the valley than I see here, which I think is evolving, so I think that's good, but that's definitely one concern. The second concern is VCs that come in with massive checks and say that, I know you need 50 million, but I'm going to only write a check of 200 million and take 60% of your company. I think it's really unhealthy to create.
We have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm just the name sort of eludes me too. But the problem with that is that you're diluting the one person who has the biggest motivation and drive to have started that company. And I think that's, I see companies these days where founders have like less than 3 or 5% equity, and I don't think that's a healthy exercise and outcome early on. You can continue to grow, and eventually, I don't personally see that there should be an attribution to a percentage, but at early stages, sort of diluting somebody even when capital cash is not required, I think that to me is an unhealthy practice. Those two that I would say that are not necessarily the right approach for VCs.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we could go on about whether to take money from VCs or not, and when and how, but we have limited time. I have a list of questions that I want to ask you, but we have very little time. And I think we want to get some Q&A done as well, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. Is that fair?
I will try my best.
Okay, whatever comes to mind first. Well, it's not very tricky, straightforward. So, top startup guy in the country, Sachin, Bansal, Bhavish, or Vijay? Bhavish, all right. Favorite value creator in India, Murthy, Ratan Tata, Mukesh Ambani?
I would say Mukesh Ambani for the country in terms of what's happening.
Your favorite?
That way, I would say.
Global tech leader, Tim Cook, Elon Musk. You are kind of an Elon Musk yourself, running 3 companies simultaneously. So, Tim Cook, Elon Musk, Satya Nadella, Larry Page, Zuckerberg.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, there you go.
I love his biography, one of my favorites.
What's more important, profit or growth? Growth. Rate this in order of importance. Wealth, health, fame, and happiness.
Health, happiness, say wealth and fame before.
So when you have $1 billion, you can say that. Okay, with that, let's sort of turn it over to you guys. I'm sure there's somebody here handling the questions. It's not me, so. Arish bhai, can somebody pass the mic on to Arish bhai?
So I've never started.
So I'll just rephrase it.
Yeah, that with the 3 companies I've invested in right now that I'm running, would I exit or would I build them with global companies? I can tell you for a fact that I've never started a single company with the intention of exiting it. The first exit was actually the company sent us. I contacted them for a completely different business deal. They turned around and said, "Can we buy your company?" And I said no. And then that sort of song and dance went on for about 8 months before we eventually were convinced that it made sense for the company, for the people, for us, etc. Overall. Same with Media.net actually started with 2 inbound inquiries from the US. We got curious and we said, well, let's take a look. But none of the companies that I've started have been with the intention of selling them. Anything that is strategic at the right point in time, we'll always consider logically and weigh. I have really huge aspirations, both Flock and Zeta. I anticipate, or my goal and aspiration is to build something that's 20-30 times bigger than anything I've created so far. The potential is there, the markets have been chosen up big, and we have an amazing team that is working towards that. So that currently is my goal and aspiration.
So, since we're not building a family tree, what would you do with the perfume?
So I'm actually really deeply passionate about education and healthcare. I think these are the 2 fundamental areas that have the ability to solve for pretty much any problem in the world. They're fundamentally rooted in either lack of access to education, lack of access to healthcare. And my goal objective is, 10, 15 years from now to actually dedicate both my personal time and capital entirely towards those problems across the world.
We have another question here.
Yeah, so it's a wonderful talk. Thank you so much. I've lived in San Francisco for 6 years, and I've always heard about folk tales about Bhavin from the grapevine. So it's very nice talking to you here. My question was, when a lot of people start, they're not looking to fundraise, but there's always this fear that if the idea clicks and you're not fundraising, somebody with a bigger pocket will come and crush you. So even though all of your concerns are really, on point with a lot of what we're thinking, what do you have to say about that? I mean, someone with a bigger pocket coming and crushing you.
Yeah, man, that's where I would say, substituting cash with creativity, I always believe is a short-term solution. So I don't think you should be afraid of the fact that somebody's got bigger pockets and therefore, in fact, I would say if that was the fear, then besides Microsoft, Intel, Apple, there would be no other companies because they have the largest pockets. Theoretically, every innovation should come out of those companies. They have more money than any amount of funds in the world. So I definitely don't think you should let that, stop you in any way. I think if certainly you need capital to achieve the creative sort of outcomes that you're working towards, then definitely go down that path. I've always believed that a lot of people end up using cash also for duplicating and replicating, which actually I think is a great advantage for people who have lesser cash, which is that you always try and manage to find a way around that problem because you're not really looking at it head on in the same way that some of these companies are. And eventually, as I said, the cash, you have to be able to justify returns to your investors at some point. Though, I think I originally thought that point should have come, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years ago, and we're still sort of not there yet in certain cases. But the fact of the matter is that, that you will at some point in time have to justify returns. And at that point, your creativity and innovation will come.
Can we take one last question?
My question is, we know that Anupam doesn't need the money. If Anupam was to announce a new large company, would be looking for funding, and would you like to invest in this company without seeing the plan? Without seeing the plan?
Well, there are certain people that I would probably trust to a significant extent if we were investing money without seeing a detailed plan. But I certainly
I'm saying no plan.
See, the other thing is that so this is, in fact, I was having a discussion with a friend of mine the other day that there are people who are passionate about building, and there are people who are passionate about investing and mentoring, etc. I love building. I love solving problems. Part of the reason I started 3 companies consecutively is because because that's where my passion is. I don't really see myself ever personally as a passive investor, where I'm just putting money somewhere with no inkling or idea, not even because of trust, but because I would want to be involved in terms of at least understanding what area, what problem we're trying to solve.
Well, you can take half the company and run it. Well, guys, with that said, I want to thank Bhavin on behalf of TiE. Thank you very much.